I think I agree with Angela Rayner. No, I don't think Tories are scum. No, I don't think taking the knee is a particularly good idea either. And no, I don't think it's right that the taxpayer should fork out for some AirPod headphones. However, I think when it comes to suspected terrorists, we should shoot first and ask questions later. What about you? That's what she said earlier this week. Shoot first and ask questions later. But of course, there she is, Diane Abbott. She responded, and her response sums up Labour's problems. Is Angela suggesting a mandatory death sentence for suspected but not convicted terrorists? Well, no, that's not what she's suggesting at all. And to be honest, Diane, I don't think you'd even be able to count how many bullets are in the chamber to begin with, would you? Her maths is so bad that she thinks the weapon is actually called an AK-46. But people on the fringes of the left wing in this country quite often seem to be on very shaky ground when it comes to terrorism, as far as I can tell. And sometimes it leaves me wondering whose side are they actually on. But anyway, when it comes to terrorists, would you shoot first and ask questions later? Should we be tougher on them? Should we be harsher on them? Now, I think it's important to note one of the most high-profile cases is this whole shoot first, ask questions later attitude going horrendously wrong. And this is why it's such a good kind of internal discussion. It was on Charles de Menezes was gunned down by a copper who mistook him for a suicide bomber. But that horrific mistake came amid a backdrop of real fear, quite literally, total terror. It was just days after a failed bombing in London, which itself was just 2 weeks after the actual tube and bus bombings in which 52 people died. But then we have a look at some other incidents. PC Keith Palmer, he was knifed to death by Khalid Masood outside the Houses of Parliament. He was actually unarmed, OK? Clearly, too, were many of his fellow police officers nearby. In fact, Masood was only killed by chance when the bodyguard of Sir Michael Fallon saw what was going on and opened fire. At Masood's inquest, the undercover bodyguard said that he was convinced that Masood was going to kill him too. So he shot first and asked questions later. And other people's lives were undoubtedly saved as a result. And then, of course, there was the Streatham terrorist, Sudesh Aman. He was under nearly 24-hour surveillance, but still managed to nip into a shop, steal a knife, stab 2 people before being shot dead. The implication here is that it's interesting. If our intelligence services thought that they had to employ people armed with guns to follow this guy around 24/7, well, that was because they came to the conclusion that they'd probably have to shoot him one day. So, why not just do it? Ah, well, that's of course because we have to wait for them to begin their actual attack, don't we? Before we can kill them. And I can completely understand all of that. But then it leads me, doesn't it, onto my next thought on all of this. And I'd like you to think about this bit as well. And think about where you stand on this issue. If our justice system and our intelligence services have decided beyond any doubt that an individual is always going to pose a terrorist threat, then should we actually execute them? Angela Rayner's comments about shooting first and asking questions later is what kick-started this discussion that we're having now. But if somebody has been convicted of a terror offence and demonstrated all the key signs that they are beyond reform, that they will always be a danger, then haven't the questions already been asked and answered? In that case, we'd be shooting second and asking questions first, wouldn't we? Under our current system, we end up having to not shoot first and then keep asking questions. Why? Because we routinely arrest and detain known terrorists, then we let them back out again, then arrest them and detain them again, then we let them back out again. And then by the time we've shot them, we've usually asked the loads of questions to them, haven't we? They've made it abundantly clear what their answers are, and we still kept our pistols in our pockets. Then there's the question of, do more police officers actually want to be armed? How comfortable are they at pulling the trigger, taking a life? How are these orders actually given? Excuse me. And what does it feel like after the event? These are questions I've always wondered, and I've always wanted to ask, actually. Also, how afraid of getting it wrong are the police? Because if they're not afraid of getting it wrong, then actually I see very little problem with being a little bit less reserved in pulling the trigger when it comes to suspected terrorists.